Every afternoon at 4 p.m., Brielle slipped through the rusted gate with her two scruffy dogs, pretending to play in the sprawling fields of Maplewood Park. But the locals didn't know the truth. She was running away from the suffocating silence of her home, where her mother cried herself to sleep each night and her father's anger echoed through the walls. When the townspeople discovered Brielle's secret, the bruises hidden beneath her oversized coat and the absence of warmth in her home, it shattered their quaint perception of family life. This is the story of betrayal and the courage to seek a love that should have always been there. My name is Brielle. I am stronger than the pain they forced me to carry. As I sat on the weathered porch swing, the gentle creaking felt like the only rhythm in my life that made sense. My dogs, Willow and Scout, sprawled beside me, their soft fur brushing against my legs and providing a sense of comfort that I so desperately craved. I often found myself lost in thoughts, swirling with the chaos around me. Each day felt like a new adventure, yet my heart was heavy with the weight of unspoken truths. The laughter of children playing down the street was a stark contrast to the silence that enveloped my home. I envied their carefree spirit, the way they chased after dreams that seemed so far away from my reality. The vibrant colors of autumn had begun to paint the leaves, but everything felt muted in my world. I watched as Mrs. Jenkins tended to her garden across the street, her hands digging into the earth with purpose and care. She often smiled and waved at me, and I would nod back, wishing I could feel that warmth she exuded. Deep down, I knew she sensed something was amiss in my life. The whispers among the neighbors had grown louder lately, and though I pretended not to hear them, the words pierced my heart like arrows. They talked about the little girl who always seemed alone, who wandered through the town with her dogs, her laughter sometimes tinged with sadness. I tried to focus on the joy of being with Willow and Scout, their wagging tails bringing me momentary relief from my thoughts. Each bark and playful leap reminded me of the innocence I longed to hold on to. But the weight of my home life crept back in, and I could almost feel the coldness of my father's absence pressing down on me. My mother, though physically present, often drifted away in her thoughts, her mind a tangled web of memories that she couldn't seem to escape. I caught glimpses of her pain during late-night conversations when the shadows in her eyes revealed the battles she fought silently. I wanted to reach out, to wrap my arms around her and tell her that I understood, that we could face it together. One day, as I sat in our small living room surrounded by the remnants of family photos that felt like a different lifetime, I noticed Sarah staring blankly at the wall, her fingers tracing the outline of a picture frame. It held a photograph of us, taken years ago, before everything changed. In that moment, I decided it was time to confront the quiet storm brewing between us. "Mom, can we talk?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She turned to look at me, her eyes shimmering with unspoken emotions. I hoped she could see the strength in my heart, the love I had for her despite the distance that had grown like a chasm between us. "I don't know where to start, Brielle," she replied, her voice trembling. "There's so much I wish I could change." I felt a rush of urgency. I didn't want her to drown in regret. "You don't have to do it alone. I'm here," I said, hoping to bridge the gap that felt insurmountable. The silence that followed was thick, filled with the weight of unshared burdens. It was my mother who broke it first, her words tumbling out like a forgotten melody. "I'm scared, sweetheart. I've made mistakes. I didn't protect you like I should have." As she spoke, I realized that her fear mirrored my own. We were both trapped in a cycle of pain, unsure how to break free. "We can face it together," I urged, taking a step closer to her. "You don't have to carry it all by yourself." A flicker of hope ignited in her eyes, and I could see a crack forming in the armor she had built around herself. In that moment, I realized how desperately I wanted to help her heal, just as I longed for my own peace. Days turned into weeks, and each afternoon I would find solace in the company of Mrs. Jenkins. She began to notice the small changes in my demeanor, the way my laughter was slowly returning, and how I seemed more willing to engage with the world around me. "You have a light in you, Brielle," she said one afternoon while we pruned her roses. "Never let anyone dim it." Her words struck a chord deep within me, resonating with the hope I was slowly nurturing. I wanted to believe that I could reclaim my joy, to rise above the shadows that had shrouded my childhood. With Mrs. Jenkins as my guiding star, I began to explore ways to reach out to my mother. Together, we decided to plant a small garden in the backyard, a place for healing and growth. Each seed we placed in the soil symbolized our shared struggles, the darkness we were trying to overcome. I envisioned vibrant blooms blossoming as a testament to our resilience, a reminder that beauty could emerge from the deepest despair. As we tended to the garden, I could feel a shift in my mother. Her laughter started to come more easily, and the weight of her sorrow seemed to lighten, at least in those fleeting moments. Yet the shadows still lurked, especially when Tom's name came up. His absence was a ghost that haunted our conversations, a reminder of everything that had fractured our lives. We knew that addressing his role in our story would be essential if we were to heal fully. There were days when I felt the heaviness of my father's choices pressing down on me, his lack of emotional availability casting a long shadow over my dreams. I wanted him to see the girl I was becoming, to understand that I needed him to be part of my journey. But how could I bridge a gap that felt so vast? One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting hues of orange and pink across the sky, I mustered the courage to bring up the topic with Sarah. "What if we reached out to him? Maybe he could come and visit, just to talk," I suggested, my heart racing at the idea. She looked at me, surprise flickering in her eyes, and then a sadness settled across her features. "Brielle, it's not that simple," she said, her voice tinged with regret. But I could see a glimmer of hope stirring within her. "What if we tried?" I pressed, feeling the warmth of our garden behind us, the strength we had started to cultivate. In that moment, I realized that seeking healing was not a linear path, but a tapestry woven with threads of courage and vulnerability. Together, we stood at the precipice of change, ready to confront the past and embrace whatever lay ahead. The journey might be daunting, but the love I had for my mother, and the love I longed for from my father, made it worth every step. I was ready to navigate this terrain, to forge connections that could mend our fractured family and illuminate the path toward a brighter future. With the first rays of dawn breaking through the horizon, I felt a flicker of hope igniting inside me. Today wasn't just another day, it felt like the beginning of something transformative. I slipped on my well-worn sneakers, heart racing with anticipation, and carefully opened the door to let my dogs out. They bounded into the sunlight, tails wagging, eager for our daily adventure. Their excitement mirrored my own as we raced down the familiar path that led us to the edge of the woods. It was our sanctuary, a place where the chaos of my life seemed to dissolve into the rustling leaves and gentle breezes. As we trotted along, I took a moment to let my thoughts wander. The weight of my mother's struggles pressed heavily on my young shoulders, but there was something about being outside, surrounded by nature and my loyal companions, that offered relief. I wanted to believe that things could get better. I had seen the warmth in Mrs. Jenkins' eyes when she'd offered us cookies last week, the way she smiled with genuine concern that made me feel seen and cared for. Perhaps the kindness of our neighbors was a sign that I wasn't as alone as I sometimes felt. When we reached the small clearing nestled between the trees, I took a deep breath, inhaling the crisp scent of pine and earth. It was a sacred space for me, where I could let my imagination run wild. Today, the sun cast golden rays that danced upon the grass, and I could almost hear whispers of encouragement among the leaves. With my dogs at my side, I closed my eyes and envisioned a world where my family was whole again. I imagined laughter filling our home, the air thick with the scent of my mother's cooking, and my father sitting at the table, sharing stories. It felt so real in that moment, yet so far from the truth of my daily life. Suddenly, a noise interrupted my reverie. I opened my eyes to see Mrs. Jenkins approaching, a basket in her hands. Her silver hair glimmered in the sunlight, and her warm smile seemed to radiate comfort. I waved, a little embarrassed at being caught daydreaming in my secret spot. "Good morning, Brielle. I thought I might find you here," she said, setting the basket down on the grass. "I brought some treats for you and your dogs." "Oh, thank you," I exclaimed, my heart swelling with gratitude. It was these small gestures that reminded me that kindness still existed in the world. I knelt down to rummage through the basket, discovering homemade biscuits and even a few dog treats. My dogs sniffed eagerly, their tails wagging in approval. Mrs. Jenkins watched with a knowing look in her eyes. "You know, sweet girl, I've seen you out here quite a lot. You have a big heart, and that shines through even in tough times," she said gently. Her words brought a warmth that I desperately needed. I glanced away, feeling a flush of embarrassment. "I just like being outside. It's easier here." I hesitated, unsure of how to explain the heaviness that often lingered in my chest when I was at home. "You're brave, Brielle. It's okay to feel overwhelmed sometimes," she replied, her voice soothing. "If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm just next door. You don't have to carry everything alone." Her offer hung in the air, a lifeline I hadn't realized I needed. I thought about my mother and the walls she built around her heart, how those walls had become mine too. Could I really reach out to someone? The idea felt frightening, yet freeing. "Thank you, Mrs. Jenkins. I appreciate that," I said, hoping my voice conveyed the sincerity of my words. She smiled again, and I could see the glimmer of understanding in her eyes. As we chatted about our favorite books and the antics of my dogs, I felt the tightness in my chest begin to loosen. Sharing laughter with her felt like discovering a hidden treasure. When it was time to leave, she placed her hand on my shoulder, a gesture of connection that lingered long after she walked away. The adventure home felt different. I glanced back at the clearing, now imbued with a sense of possibility. I could feel a shift within me, the understanding that I didn't have to face my challenges in isolation. My heart brimmed with hope as I returned to the street, envisioning a future where I could voice my feelings, where I could encourage my mother to find support too. As I entered the house, the familiar scent of coffee mingled with something baked. My mother was in the kitchen, a place she often found solace. I hesitated at the threshold, reminded of how difficult things could be between us, but I pushed past the hesitation. Today was different, and I needed her to know that I was here, ready to support her in whatever way I could. "Hey, Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice bright. "What are you making?" Sarah turned from the stove, her smile faltering slightly before it returned, softening her features. "Just some muffins. I thought it would be nice to have a treat together." Her words wrapped around my heart, and I felt a surge of gratitude. I moved closer, helping her mix the batter. As we worked side by side, I felt the warmth of connection blossom, a promise of healing in the air. I wanted to tell her about Mrs. Jenkins, about the kindness I had discovered, but I held back for a moment, letting the moment linger instead. Perhaps we both needed this time to share the silence, to let the weight of our unspoken truths melt away with the warmth of the oven. I could sense the changes ahead, the shifts in our family dynamic beginning to take form. With each interaction, each shared moment, the chasm felt less daunting. The journey toward healing had begun, and with it came the belief that even fractured families could find their way back together again. If you're enjoying this journey and want to explore more stories like this, consider subscribing for updates. Together, we can uncover the power of hope and healing. The following weeks felt like a surreal blend of colors and emotions, each day a new brushstroke on the canvas of my life. With the help of Mrs. Jenkins, who became something of an unexpected mentor, I began to understand the importance of sharing my story. Each afternoon, she would sit on her porch, knitting while I recounted the adventures I had with my dogs, Bella and Max. It was a simple ritual, but in those moments, I felt a warmth that dispelled the lingering coldness of my home. Mrs. Jenkins listened intently, her eyes twinkling with understanding as I spoke. I found a certain comfort in her presence. She was like a lighthouse, guiding me through the fog of my family's struggles. One sunny afternoon, as I recounted a particularly funny incident where Bella had chased her tail for what seemed like an eternity, Mrs. Jenkins paused her knitting and looked at me with a seriousness that made my heart race. "Brielle," she began, her voice gentle yet firm, "you have a beautiful spirit. Don't ever let anyone dim that light." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope igniting within me. I realized that while I couldn't change my family, I could embrace the love and support that surrounded me. That evening, as I returned home, I noticed my mother sitting on the couch, her eyes glued to the television. The room felt heavy with unspoken words, a weight I had become accustomed to. I had learned to navigate these silences, but I sensed that something had shifted in my mother's demeanor. She looked tired, as if the world had pressed down too hard. "Hey, Mom," I said softly, trying to break the tension. She turned her gaze towards me, and for a fleeting moment, I caught a glimpse of the woman I used to know, the one who laughed freely and danced in the kitchen while cooking dinner. "How was your day?" I asked, hoping to draw her out from whatever shadows she was battling. "Just the same as always, sweetie," she replied, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I wished I could reach into her heart to understand the weight she bore alone. But instead, I decided to share my own joys, recounting my afternoons with Mrs. Jenkins and the dogs. As I spoke, I noticed a slight change in her expression. The corners of her mouth twitched, and her shoulders relaxed just a fraction. "Your dogs sound like they're quite the handful," she commented, a hint of a real smile breaking through. I could hardly believe it, but for that moment, we shared a bridge over the gap that had grown between us. I pressed on, recounting the tales of Bella's antics and Max's stubbornness, and with each story, I could see my mother soften. It was a small victory, but it filled me with determination. As days turned into weeks, I made it a point to keep that connection alive, weaving my stories into our conversations. One evening, while I was pouring my heart out about a wild run in the park, my father walked in. He had returned from work, looking worn and distant, as usual. I felt a pang of disappointment that he hadn't noticed the change in our home, the slow reopening of a door we thought was permanently shut. But as I continued to speak, I noticed him glancing at us, caught between his world and ours. "Dad, you should join us," I blurted out, an impulsive plea echoing in the silence. His eyes flickered with surprise, and for a heartbeat, I thought he might refuse, retreating back into his isolated shell. But instead, he hesitated, then walked over to the couch, sitting down awkwardly beside my mother. "Go on, Brielle. I'd like to hear about your day," he said, his voice surprisingly soft. It was a simple gesture, but it felt monumental. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of their combined attention, and I launched into the latest adventure my dogs had taken me on. As I spoke, I noticed my father's features gradually relax, and I could almost see the years of detachment slip away. I shared every detail, the moments that made me laugh and the ones that made me feel proud. I could see my mother leaning in, her smile growing warmer, and my father nodding slightly, as if he were finally tuning into our frequency. By the time I finished, the room felt lighter, almost alive with possibilities. For the first time in a long while, we were a family again, 3 pieces that were starting to fit together, even if only momentarily. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt something inside me shift. The hope that I had slowly nurtured began to blossom into a quiet belief that maybe, just maybe, things could improve. I knew it wouldn't be easy. There were still shadows lingering in my mother's eyes, and walls built around my father's heart, but I felt ready to face whatever came next. The journey ahead seemed uncertain, but the strength of my community and the bonds I was forging gave me the courage to keep moving forward. As I drifted off to sleep, I held on to that flicker of hope, knowing that every small step counted. The world was vast and full of challenges, but I believed in the power of connection, in the magic of shared stories, and above all, in the love that had the potential to heal even the deepest wounds. The next day dawned bright and clear, the sun spilling its golden light into my room. I stretched, feeling the warmth wrap around me like a comforting blanket. The thought of visiting Mrs. Jenkins filled me with excitement, a welcome distraction from the weight of my family's struggles. With a quick breakfast of toast and jam, I grabbed the leashes for my dogs, ready for our daily adventure. My heart raced with anticipation as we bounded outside, the crisp air invigorating my spirit. Mrs. Jenkins' house was only a few blocks away, a quaint little cottage with a garden bursting with colorful flowers. I often marveled at how she could coax life from the earth, her hands nurturing the blooms just as I longed for someone to nurture me. As I approached, I noticed her sitting on her porch, a book resting on her lap and a content smile lighting her face. Her presence was always soothing, like a balm for my restless heart. "Brielle, there you are," she called, her voice warm and inviting. I waved, my dogs wagging their tails in unison, eager for the attention only she could give. As I walked up the steps, her eyes sparkled with kindness, an unspoken understanding passing between us. She had always sensed the heaviness that lingered just beneath my cheerful exterior. "How are you today, my dear?" she asked, and I sensed the weight of the question, knowing she could see more than I let on. I hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. "I'm good, just taking the dogs for a walk." I kept my answer light, hoping she would drop the topic, but Mrs. Jenkins was wise. She knew when to gently prod and when to let things be. "Walking those pups must be a joy. They bring such energy to the neighborhood," she said, chuckling as my dogs playfully tugged at their leashes, eager to explore. I joined her laughter, grateful for the momentary distraction. We spent the next hour chatting about everything and nothing, sharing laughter and stories. It was the kind of connection I craved, one that didn't demand explanations or apologies, just companionship. At the mention of the flowers, I found myself spilling out tales about my own adventures with them, how I would sneak into the local park to pick wildflowers, weaving them into crowns for my dogs. Mrs. Jenkins smiled, her eyes twinkling at my enthusiasm. As we spoke, I noticed something shift in the air. The lighthearted conversation began to sway into deeper territory. "You know, Brielle," she began, her voice softening, "sometimes even the strongest flowers need a little extra care to bloom." Her words struck a chord within me, resonating with the feelings I had buried deep inside. "Do you think they can grow in the dark?" I asked, my curiosity pulling at the edges of my heart. It felt like a question that had been simmering inside me, one I had never known how to voice. "Ah, sweet girl," she replied, her gaze steady. "Every flower needs light, but the darkest nights can help them strengthen their roots. Sometimes the struggles make them more beautiful." Her words washed over me, igniting something I had almost forgotten, the possibility of growth amidst pain. My thoughts drifted to my mother, Sarah, and the shadows that loomed over her life. I had always seen her as someone who had been stifled, lost in the darkness of her past. What if she could find a way to bloom again? The thought filled me with a mix of hope and apprehension. I wanted her to experience the light, but how could I help her break free from the chains of her own making? As if sensing the internal battle within me, Mrs. Jenkins gently placed her hand on my shoulder. "Brielle, you have a big heart. Don't forget to give that love to yourself, too." Her words were like a gentle reminder, nudging me to acknowledge my own feelings, my own needs. I often worried about how my existence affected Sarah. I was terrified of adding to her burdens, yet I yearned for us to find a path back to each other. After bidding Mrs. Jenkins farewell, I felt a renewed sense of determination. My dogs pranced beside me, tails wagging, oblivious to the weight of my thoughts. I decided then that I would try to bridge the chasm between my mother and me. I would be the light that could guide her back to herself, just as Mrs. Jenkins had illuminated my own path. That evening, I found Sarah sitting at the kitchen table, lost in her thoughts, her face shadowed by the dim light. The sight of her made my heart ache. I hesitated before speaking, unsure of how to begin. "Mom?" I ventured softly, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked up, her eyes weary yet curious. "Yes, honey." "Can we talk? I mean, really talk?" I felt a flutter of fear in my stomach. What if she didn't want to? What if my words only pushed her further away? A long moment passed before she sighed, running her fingers through her hair as if gathering her thoughts. "Sure, Brielle, I think we need to." As we began to talk, I noticed how Sarah's walls started to crumble, bit by bit. She opened up about her past, her struggles, the fears that had held her captive for so long. I listened intently, absorbing her words, realizing how much we both needed this connection. It became clear that I wasn't just a burden in her life. I was her light, and she was mine. Our conversation weaved through the complexities of our hearts, touching on everything we had both tried to ignore. Together, we began the delicate dance of healing, one small step at a time. In that moment, I understood that love wasn't just about the absence of pain, but about walking through it together, hand in hand. The journey wouldn't be easy, but perhaps, just perhaps, we could find our way back to each other, blooming in the light we both so desperately needed. As days turned into weeks, I felt a shift in our little household. The air was lighter, filled with tentative hope, as my mother and I ventured into the terrain of our emotions, unearthing things we had buried for too long. Sarah began sharing her own memories, stories of her youth that had woven her into the fabric of the woman I knew. I listened intently, my heart swelling with admiration and a touch of sadness for the girl she once was, one who had dreams, laughter, and the innocence of youth, now dimmed by the weight of her choices. It was strange, realizing that the same woman who cared for me was also shaped by her own struggles. I could see her more clearly now, not just as my mother, but as a person navigating her own turbulent past. Mrs. Jenkins, our ever-watchful neighbor, seemed to sense the changes in our home. She was always popping by, her arms laden with freshly baked cookies or bouquets of flowers from her garden. Each visit felt like a gentle nudge, encouraging us to keep moving forward. One afternoon, while I played in the yard with my dogs, she sat on the porch and asked me about my adventures. I recounted tales of our escapades, from discovering hidden trails in the woods to chasing after butterflies in the meadows, my excitement spilling over in every word. "You have such a bright spirit, Brielle," she smiled, her eyes twinkling. "Don't ever let anyone dim that light. You have the power to inspire others just as you've inspired me." Her words clung to me, wrapping around my heart like a warm hug. It was true. I had always believed in the magic of connection, that my playful spirit could somehow lift those around me. Still, the thought of my father weighed heavily in the back of my mind. Tom remained distant, a ghost hovering in the corners of our lives. His presence felt more in absence than in action. I often wondered if I could reach him, if he could see the light in my mother's eyes when she spoke of healing, or if he was too far gone, locked in his own shadows. I longed for him to share in our small triumphs, to understand that we were fighting for a fresh start, but he seemed oblivious to the changes that were unfolding right before him. One evening, after a long day filled with laughter and storytelling, I found Sarah sitting quietly at the kitchen table, her gaze lost in the distance. I approached her cautiously, noticing the faint lines of worry etched on her forehead. "Mom, what's wrong?" I asked softly, wrapping my fingers around her hand. She sighed deeply, as if releasing a weight she had been carrying alone. "It's just that I worry sometimes, Brielle. I want to protect you from everything I've been through, but I also want to be real with you. I don't want to make the same mistakes again." I could see tears glistening in her eyes, and it struck me how vulnerable she truly was. It was a reminder that healing wasn't linear. We would have our ups and downs, moments of clarity mixed with doubt. "Mom, you're doing great," I reassured her. "We're in this together, right? Just like you said." I squeezed her hand tighter,
offering her the same comfort she had given me countless times before. We can face the past,
But let's also celebrate our victories, no matter how small. Like the fact that you shared your stories with me today. That's big. She chuckled softly, a faint smile breaking through her worry. You're right, sweet girl. I guess sometimes I forget to look at the positives. You really are my light. With each passing day, we began to find our footing, learning the delicate balance of nurturing our relationship while still dealing with the reality of Tom. I could see that the change was not just in my mother, but also in how I approached my father. I was no longer afraid to express my feelings, whether it was anger or sadness. One Sunday afternoon, when Tom came to visit, I decided to confront him about my feelings, about the void that his absence had created in my life. I invited him into my room, the very sanctuary where I had painted my dreams on the walls. As he sat on the edge of my bed, I took a deep breath, feeling my heart race. Dad, I need you to know how I feel, I began, my voice trembling slightly. I miss you. I miss having you in my life. It's hard not having you around. Can we try to change that? He looked surprised, as if my words had jolted him from a deep slumber. I didn't realize. I thought you were okay, he stammered, confusion clouding his eyes. It was in that moment that I recognized how much he had been lost too, trapped in his own world. It's not just about being physically present. I want us to connect, to laugh together, to be a family. The silence that followed felt heavy, filled with unspoken emotions. I could see a flicker of realization in his expression, and for the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe things could change. After our conversation, I didn't expect immediate results. Healing takes time after all, and I understood that my father's journey would be just as complicated as my mother's. Yet I felt empowered, like I had carved a path through the thick underbrush of my family's issues. I knew I couldn't do it all alone, but with my mother and the supportive community around us, we would keep moving forward. I shared my story with Mrs. Jenkins, who smiled and encouraged me to continue being brave. You're leading the way, Brielle, she said. Sometimes the youngest among us have the most powerful voices. Use yours. In those moments, I began to realize that each story shared, every encounter had the potential to spark change. It wasn't just about my family, it was about the entire town, woven together in our struggles and joys. The more we opened our hearts, the more strength we found, and I felt a surge of determination. If I could help others understand the importance of connection and resilience, perhaps I could be the catalyst for healing, not just in my life, but in the lives of those around me. So, as I walked my dogs through the woods and shared my laughter, I couldn't help but invite anyone who listened to share their own stories, to join me in this journey of healing. Together, we could weave a tapestry of hope and love that would carry us through the storms ahead. As I strolled through the familiar trails with my dogs, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was no longer just a girl escaping her problems. Something had shifted in me since the day Mrs. Jenkins, with her kind smile and knowing eyes, had come to sit beside me on my porch. She had shared her own struggles, recounting tales of loss and love that resonated deeply with my own experiences. It was as if she understood the silent battles that raged within our household. I could sense that the community around me was awakening, slowly but surely, to the reality I had been living. I decided it was time to open my heart even more. That evening, after another long day filled with echoes of my parents' hushed arguments, I gathered the courage to approach my mother. As she flipped through the pages of a worn-out magazine, her gaze seemed distant, as if she were trapped in her own world. "Mom," I said softly, trying to break the ice that had settled thickly between us. "Can we talk?" She looked up, surprise flickering in her eyes, but the weariness quickly returned. "About what, Brielle?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I could feel the weight of her past pressing down on her, and I wanted so desperately to lift it, if only for a moment. I think I want to help us.
I want to do something about how we feel, I admitted, unsure if my words would make a difference. To my surprise, a glimmer of hope appeared in her expression, as if she had been waiting for this moment too. "What do you have in mind?" she asked, a little more animated now. I hesitated, but felt the warmth of the sun streaming through the window, illuminating the shadows that had so often haunted our home. What if we started by inviting people over? We could have a dinner or a gathering, just a way to connect with the neighbors.
I held my breath, watching my mother's brow furrow in thought. "Brielle, I'm not sure," she began, but I interrupted her gently. "Please, Mom, I think it could really help us. And maybe we could also ask Mrs. Jenkins to help us plan it. She seems to know everyone around here." A flicker of recognition crossed her face, and I felt a surge of determination. After a moment of silence, she nodded slowly. "All right, let's try it." My heart soared as I realized this could be our first step towards healing. I pictured a cozy gathering, laughter filling the air, and a sense of warmth wrapping around us like a comforting blanket. The days that followed were filled with purpose. With Mrs. Jenkins by my side, we began preparations, turning our kitchen into a bustling hub of activity. We baked, chopped, and decorated, transforming our home into a welcoming space. The anticipation grew, and as I hung colorful streamers in the living room, I could almost feel the excitement pulsing in the air. On the night of the gathering, the house buzzed with energy. Neighbors arrived, bringing dishes that filled our home with the rich aromas of home-cooked meals. I watched my mother move among our guests, her laughter ringing out more freely than I had heard in years. As she spoke with Mrs. Jenkins, I saw her relax, even for just a moment. It was a beautiful sight, and I felt a sense of pride swell within me. As the evening progressed, I made my way to the backyard, where a small bonfire crackled under the night sky. I gathered a few children from the neighborhood, and soon we were sharing stories and roasting marshmallows. In those fleeting moments, I realized that I was not just a bystander in my own life. I was a part of something larger, a community woven together by shared experiences and hope. As the flames danced and sparks floated into the night, I caught sight of my mother watching from the porch, her face illuminated by the flickering light. I could see the weight lifting from her shoulders, the laughter spilling from her lips as she engaged with our guests. It was like watching a flower bloom after a long winter. Eventually, she joined us by the fire, and her warmth enveloped me as she sat beside me, a smile gracing her lips. "Thank you, Brielle," she said softly. "This was a good idea." I felt a rush of emotion, my heart swelling with a mixture of hope and love. "I just want us to be okay," I confessed, looking into her eyes. "I know things have been hard, but we can work through it together." "I'm willing to try," she replied, and in that moment, I knew we were on the right path. As the gathering continued, I noticed my father lingering at the edge of the yard, his expression distant and unsure. I had often felt the pain of his absence in our lives, but tonight, I felt a flicker of determination to reach out to him. I walked over, my dogs trotting beside me, and stood next to him as he stared into the fire. "Dad," I began, my voice shaky but resolute, "will you come join us? We're all together, and I think it would mean a lot." He turned to me, surprise etched on his face, and for a moment, I dared to hope he would say yes. I don't know if that's a good idea, Brielle," he replied, his voice low. "Please, we're a family, and I want us to be whole," I pleaded. He looked back at the fire, and I could see the conflict within him. My heart raced as I waited for his decision, praying he would choose to step out of the shadows and into the warmth of our gathering. After what felt like an eternity, he finally nodded. "All right, I'll come." My heart leaped as I led him back toward the laughter and warmth of our neighbors. In that moment, under the stars and surrounded by the love of our community, I felt a sense of hope blooming within me, a belief that perhaps healing was possible, and that together we could face whatever storms lay ahead.